You find out you speak Pashto at age 7 when a man at a wedding says something rude about your mother and you translate it to her before your brain registers that you weren't supposed to understand him. Your mother stares at you. The man stares at you. You stare at the floor because you're 7 and you've just learned that knowing things and being supposed to know things are two entirely different categories. Your mother is Afghan, your father is American. Specifically, he's from Akron, Ohio, which is a city that exists primarily to make people from other cities feel better about where they're from. He met your mother in Kabul in 2008 during a contracting job he describes as logistics, and she describes as he drove trucks for the military and refused to admit it. They married in 2009. You were born in 2010 in a hospital in Akron that has since been converted into luxury apartments, which is the fate of most things in Akron. You grow up bilingual the way some children grow up ambidextrous, not a skill, a condition. English at school, Dari and Pashto at home depending on which grandmother is visiting and what mood the household is in. By 8 you dream in 2 languages simultaneously and wake up unsure which one is real. By 10 you're translating at parent-teacher conferences, at doctor's appointments, at the DMV when your mother needs to renew her license and the clerk speaks too fast, and your mother's English, which is excellent in calm conditions, compresses under stress into something that requires interpretation. This is how you become a translator before anyone calls you one, not through training, through necessity, through being the person in the room who can hear both sides of a wall. Your father notices. He's proud in the specific way of American fathers who don't fully understand what they're witnessing but recognize that it has value. He tells people at barbecues that his kid speaks 3 languages. You speak 2 fluently in functional Urdu from the neighbor downstairs who taught you card games on Saturday afternoons, but you don't correct him because correcting fathers at barbecues is a social crime in Akron. At 12, you start picking up languages the way other kids pick up video game mechanics. The underlying architecture becomes visible after the second language. Every language after that is just a variation on a structure you've already mapped. By 13, you have functional Arabic from online lessons you take at 11 p.m. because the free tier only unlocks certain modules after midnight. By 14, you have conversational Farsi, which is close enough to Dari that your grandmother calls it cheating. At 15, your school's language department runs out of things to teach you. The Spanish teacher is quietly threatened. The French teacher nominates you for a state linguistics competition you win without studying. The competition judge, a retired professor from Ohio State, pulls you aside afterward and says something that will reroute your entire life. He says, "You have a gift that governments pay very well for. You should know that before someone else tells you." You file it away. You're 15. You have more immediate concerns, which are OP chemistry, a girl named Priya, who sits 2 rows ahead of you in history and has never once looked in your direction, and the fact that your family's car makes a sound your father describes as probably fine in a tone that suggests he knows it isn't. The summer before junior year, your father gets a contract job in Germany. His company installs communications infrastructure for NATO facilities in and around Stuttgart. It pays well, better than anything in Akron has ever paid. The whole family goes. You spend the summer in a rented apartment in Stuttgart learning German at a pace that alarms your landlord and delights your father, who tells people at the NATO facility barbecues that his kid speaks 4 languages. You don't correct him. The facility is enormous. Your father works long hours. Your mother finds a community of Afghan diaspora families in Stuttgart that she folds herself into with the ease of a person who has always known how to find her people in unfamiliar rooms. You are 16, alone in a city where you technically speak the language but don't know anyone, and you do what 16-year-olds with unusual skills and too much time have always done. You find something to do with the skill. The apartment building has old infrastructure. The walls are thick, but the ventilation system is a 1970s original that carries sound in ways the architect almost certainly did not intend. The unit above yours is occupied by a rotating cast of personnel from the facility. Contractors, military attachés, the occasional officer staying short-term between housing assignments. You discover this accidentally when a conversation in English drifts through your bedroom vent one Tuesday night while you're doing homework, and you realize you can hear it clearly enough to follow. You are not trying to eavesdrop, you put in earbuds, you turn on music, but the music doesn't fully cover it and you catch fragments, operational language, jargon you half recognize from years of your father's work talk filtered through dinner conversations, acronyms that mean nothing yet. Then one Thursday night in August, something different comes through the vent. It starts in English. Two voices, then a third voice joins in Pashto. Then the conversation shifts almost entirely into Pashto, and the English voices go quiet, and you can tell from the silence that the English speakers cannot follow what the Pashto speaker is saying. You can. You're doing homework. You stop doing homework. You sit completely still the way you did at 7 years old at that wedding, and you listen, not because you decided to, but because your brain doesn't have an off switch for language. It processes what it hears automatically the way an ear processes music, whether you're paying attention or not. What you hear is this: a location, a date, a reference to a transfer. The Pashto speaker uses a word for payment that has a specific connotation in the dialect, not a salary, not a transaction, something closer to the word used when a debt is being settled outside of official channels. Then a name, a rank. Then a phrase that your grandmother uses when she talks about things that shouldn't be discussed in front of children, which is the Pashto equivalent of saying, "This conversation didn't happen." Then the Pashto voice stops. The English voices resume. You hear a door, footsteps. The unit above goes quiet. You sit in your bedroom for 40 minutes without moving. You are 16 years old. You just heard what sounds like a military officer accepting payment from someone operating in a language his colleagues cannot understand, in a conversation structured to be invisible to anyone without your specific and accidental skill set. You don't know if you heard what you think you heard. You don't have context. You don't have training. You have 2 years of midnight Arabic lessons and a grandmother and a ventilation system built in 1973. And if you're right, you're the only person in the building who knows. The first thing you do is nothing. For 3 days you do nothing because you're 16 and the machinery of what to do with this information is not something anyone has ever taught you. And the internet, which teaches you everything else, is not a reliable resource for what to do when you accidentally overhear a possible military corruption conversation through a vent in Stuttgart. You write it down. Everything you remember, the exact words, the dialect markers, the specific connotation of the payment word. You write it in English and then in Pashto side by side because the translation matters. The nuance lives in the original, and you know from years of translating that the gap between what someone says and what the English version of it means can be the difference between a misunderstanding and something else entirely. You show it to nobody. But if you're thinking about showing it to someone, and you're thinking about it constantly, hit subscribe before you keep reading, because where this goes next is the part nobody prepares you for. You tell your father. Not directly. You tell him you heard something through the vent that you didn't understand and you describe it in the vaguest possible terms, a conversation Pashto, something about money, and you watch his face to see if he dismisses it. He doesn't dismiss it. His face does something you've seen it do exactly once before, when the car made the not probably fine sound on the highway and he had to decide in real time how seriously to take it. He asks you 3 questions. He asks what specific word was used for payment. He asks if you're certain about the date. He asks if you wrote it down. When you say yes to the 3rd question, he's quiet for a long time. Then he says, "Don't tell your mother yet." And he makes a phone call in the other room with the door closed. You don't know who he calls. You don't ask. You sit in your bedroom and stare at the document on your laptop and feel the specific vertigo of being a person who has handed something to someone else and cannot take it back. What happens next happens fast. Within 48 hours, 2 men your father introduces only as colleagues come to the apartment. They are polite, professionally bland, and ask you to walk them through what you heard with a thoroughness that tells you they are not treating this as the overactive imagination of a teenager. One of them speaks Pashto. He asks you to repeat the specific word for payment. You do. He looks at the other man. Something passes between them that you're not supposed to see and cannot help seeing. They take your written document. They tell you not to discuss this with anyone. They tell your father the same thing. They leave. The apartment feels different after they leave, smaller, like the walls moved in slightly while you weren't watching. 3 weeks later, your father tells you the contract job is ending early. The family is going back to Akron. He says it's a scheduling issue. His voice is doing the thing it does when he's managing information the way your mother manages it. Editing, not lying, giving you the version that lets everyone sleep. You don't push it. You're learning that some doors, once you understand they exist, are better left closed. What you don't find out until much later, until you're 19 and a former colleague of your father's tells you over coffee in a moment of candor he probably shouldn't have allowed, is what happened after those two men left your apartment. The name you heard, the rank, the payment conversation you intercepted through a 1973 ventilation system while doing AP chemistry homework. It matched a pattern of communications the counterintelligence unit had been tracking for 11 months. Not proof, a piece that fit. The kind of piece that doesn't close a case but moves it from circumstantial to actionable. The person in question was quietly reassigned. No public case, no charges filed that anyone outside the relevant agencies would ever see. A career that ended without explanation in the way that certain careers end when the explanation would cost more than the ending. 11 months of work. Moved forward by a 16-year-old and a ventilation system. You go back to Akron, junior year, AP chemistry. Priya has moved to a school in Columbus, which resolves that situation in the way that geographic distance resolves certain situations, completely and permanently. The German landlord sends a card. The Stuttgart apartment is rented to someone else. The unit above it continues to house rotating NATO personnel who have conversations in English that drift through the vents into empty rooms. Your father never discusses it again. Your mother never finds out. You go to college at 18 on a linguistics scholarship that your father's colleague, the candid one, helped facilitate through channels he declines to specify. You study at a school in Virginia that has an unusual number of professors who seem to know people in unusual places. Several of your classmates have fathers who describe their jobs as logistics. You don't become a spy. That's not how this works, despite what the architecture of this story might suggest. You become a translator, officially, properly. With credentials and a security clearance that takes 14 months to process and requires interviews with people who already know answers to the questions they're asking. In your first year of work, you sit in rooms where conversations happen in languages that other people in the room cannot follow. You render those conversations into English with the precision your gift and your training have spent 16 years developing together. You are good at it. You are, by some measures, exceptional at it. And occasionally, in those rooms, you hear a word used with a specific connotation, a dialect marker, a phrase structured to be invisible to anyone without your particular and accidental skill set, and you translate it, completely, accurately, with the full weight of what it means intact. Because that's what you do when you're the person in the room who can hear both sides of the wall. You render the conversation, you hand it to someone else. And you have learned since you were 16 years old sitting still in a Stuttgart bedroom for 40 minutes, that what they do with it after that is a door you understand exists and have chosen to leave closed. That wraps it up for today. This story is entirely fictional, but military interpreter programs, language acquisition as intelligence infrastructure, and the role of accidental civilian witnesses in counterintelligence operations are all documented dimensions of how modern intelligence actually functions. If this one sat differently, drop a comment and tell me honestly, at 16, in that bedroom, would you have written it down? Because if the answer is yes, this story isn't about a translator in Stuttgart. It's about every person who ever heard something they weren't supposed to hear and had to decide what hearing it made them responsible for. Subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a like if this one hit different. See you in the next one.